וכמו שנחלקו המקובלים בעניין הכסר, that just as the מקובלים, the kabbalists, had different opinions regarding kesser, between the two opinions of the early Mekubalim that actually Keser is Kadmon and Keser is Ein Sof, versus the Ramak that says no, only Atzmus is Ein Sof, and therefore Keser is a Sphira, and Sphira Mechudeshes. Arizal came and says Keser has two aspects to it. The Mekubalim had different opinions, the early Mekubalim and the Ramak. כמו כן, so too, יש כאין מחלוקת זו בפירוש לשון אין סוף. There is a similar מחלוקת in the meaning what it is exactly, where it is and what it is and who it is, the term אין סוף, infinite. Good morning, good morning. Today is Yud Zayin Tov Elul. And we are on page Reish Chaf Aleph, which is Kuf Samech Vov in the old edition. Reish Chaf Aleph, אך העניין דכמו שנחלקו המקובלים בעניין הכסר. So, we learned a few shittas. We learned the different shittas regarding the view of the early Mekubalim and the Ramak and eventually the Arizal is regarding Keser. According to the early Mekubalim, Keser is Ein Sof, is Ein Sof, infinite. According to the Ramak, Moshe Cordovero, Keser is Sphira Mechudeshes. Keser is an emanated, a created sphere. So this is a very different view. When the Mekubalim see Keser as Ein Sof, and the Ramak sees Keser as one of the spheres. And according to the Hachra'ah, to the verdict, so to speak, to the resolution of the Arizal, Keser is divided to two. The inner part of Keser hosts Ein Sof, which means the lowest aspect of the emanator. That's the inner aspect of Keser. And the external, the chitzoni aspect of Keser is a sphira, and a sphira mechudeshes, a new sphira that has a beginning and end like all other spheres. That's according to the Arizal. He resolves these two opposite opinions by saying there is Pnimius HaKeser and Chitzonius HaKeser. Pnimius HaKeser is the lowest aspect of the emanator, and Chitzonius HaKeser is the highest aspect or the origin of the emanation of spheros. And as such, Keser is the first sphere in Chitzonius HaKeser. We discussed it last time. We spoke about Hashpa'ah Pnimis and Hashpa'ah Chitzonis, like the Hashpa'ah Milamayla that comes in the weekdays and the Hashpa'ah Milamayla that comes on Shabbos or Yamim Tovim. It's more Pnimius Hashpa'ah. So there is this Pnimius of spheres and there is the Chitzonius of spheres. When we count the Pnimius of spheres, we don't count Keser, because Keser, the Pnimius HaKeser is not a sphere. Pnimius HaKeser is Ein Sof, is the lowest aspect of the emanator. It cannot be a sphere. But if the Hashpa'ah is the Hashpa'ah Chitzonis from Chitzonius HaKeser, in that case, Keser is the first of the spheros, and is shayach to Oilamos and so on, and Sphira Mechudeshes. Now we have two major questions regarding the Shita of the Arizal. The first one, if Keser is Sphira Mechudeshes, if Keser is a Sphira, how is it possible that in Keser there will be Ein Sof? How can the Ein Sof be a pnimius, even a pnimius, doesn't matter, but how can it be part of something which has limit, which is relatively finite? The spheros are not Ein Sof. They are one with the Ein Sof, but each one has a definition to it, has gvul to it. So, and there are sphira mechudeshet. It's not just an expression of Or Ein Sof, it's a sphira mechudeshet. Each sphira is a sphira that was, that is, how shall I say, individually emanated and created. So how in a created sphira there is Ein Sof? How can a created sphira be a keli for Ein Sof? Even when you say that it is pnimius, okay, but how can it all together? Yes, you understood? Am I understood? That's first question. And the second question is, like from another angle. According to the Arizal, Pnimius HaKeser is the lowest level of the Ma'atzil, right? Pnimius of Keser, the innermost aspect of Keser, is actually the last or the lowest level of the emanator itself, of Or Ein Sof itself. If this is the case, how that means the Elokus itself. How can you say about the emanator and about the Elokus itself? How can you say that there is a Bchina Elyona and Bchina Tachtona? How can you say the lowest level of the emanator? When it's emanator means Or Ein Sof. It's infinite. There's no Mala and Mata. We had this question before. Or Ein Sof, what he says in the Zohar, Lemala Mala Ad En Keitz, or Lemata Mata Ad En Tachlis. How can you say about Ein Sof, Mala and Mata? We asked this way back. And we said then that regarding that question, that is not about Lemala and Mata in location, it's about two tnuos in Or Ein Sof. That there are two energies in Or Ein Sof, the energy to go inward and the energy to manifest. It really originates in Atzmus Or Ein Sof that has a yecholes, that has the ability to, and the possibility to shine and the possibility not to shine. And that is in Or Ein Sof expressed as Koyach HaGvul and Koyach HaBli Gvul, and then it becomes Or HaGvul and Or HaBli Gvul, and then it manifests in our reality in Oros and Kelim, anything that has these two aspects, Chesed and Gvura and so on. But now the second question is, we are talking about the emanator, not spheros. You're talking about Elokus itself. How can you say in Elokus itself, Bechina Elyona, Bechina Tachtona, that the lowest level of Elokus, there are no levels there. It's one. You cannot divide it to high and low. In order to answer the questions about the Shita of the Arizal, that holds that Keser has Pnimius, which is the lowest level of the emanator, and Chitzonius, which is the beginning and the origin of the worlds of the emanation, we have these to answer the two questions that we just asked, which number one, how can a sphera host Ein Sof? Because the sphera has a gvul to it. And number two, how can you divide Ein Sof to Bchina Elyona and Bchina Tachtona, to the higher or the lowest level? No levels there. So now, in order to answer the questions on the Arizal, now we're going diving deeper. And the Rebbe now is bringing another machloikes, another difference of views between the Mekubalim what is Ein Sof? Not what the meaning of Ein Sof is. Everybody understand what the meaning is, no end is Ein Sof. But what we are pointing to when we say Or Ein Sof, and especially in Kabbalah, in Sifrei Kabbalah, when Kabbalah talks about Ein Sof. And from this machlokes, what is Ein Sof, we will be able to understand the Shita of the Arizal that presents and resolve these two questions that would. But let's start learning. Acha Inyan. The matter is like this. דכמו שנחלקו המקובלים בעניין הכסר, that just as the מקובלים, the kabbalists, had different opinions regarding keser, and the Arizal resolved, הכריע, between the two opinions of the early מקובלים that actually keser is kadmon and keser is Ein Sof, versus the Ramak that says no, only Atzmus is Ein Sof, and therefore keser is a sphira, and it's sphira mechudeshes. Arizal came and says we have keser has two aspects to it. So just as the Mekubalim had different opinions, the early Mekubalim and the Ramak, כמו כן, so too, יש כאין מחלוקת זו בפירוש לשון אין סוף. There is a similar מחלוקת in the meaning and what it is exactly, where it is and what it is and who it is, the term Ein Sof, infinite. So just as the Mekubalim have different opinions and views regarding Keser, whether Keser is Ein Sof or not, so too they have machlokes regarding the expression Ein Sof, whether Ein Sof applies to Kadosh Baruch Hu himself, Atzmus, or not. So in the context of Ein Sof that is spoken about in the books of Kabbalah, whether Ein Sof, this is the Ein Sof that creates worlds, okay? So because only Ein Sof can create worlds Yesh Me'ayin. And regarding that, there is a machlokes. Is it Atzmus Ein Sof or not that creates? By the way, I'll be in between you and me, I'll tell you the secret, which is, we will learn further on, eventually, now we're going to have a long discussion of pages and pages, a few memarim, 3-4 memarim. And eventually the resolution is really the shita of that the Alter Rebbe promotes, and is how shall I say, uncovering in the approach of the Mekubalim, and that is that Or Me'eina Ma'or, that creation is done by Or Ein Sof, by the light of Ein Sof, and even though light is not the Ma'or, the Or is not the Ma'or, light is not the source, it's just the light that comes out of the source. Nevertheless, Or is Me'eina Ma'or. Because the nature of Or is its bitul, the Or carries qualities of the source, of the Ma'or. And therefore, the Or can create Yesh Me'ayin. Not because of itself. Because of itself, Or cannot create Yesh Me'ayin because it's not real Ein Sof. It has a beginning, the Ma'or. But it carries in it tchunos, qualities of the Ma'or, and therefore Or Ein Sof can create and does create. That's the resolution to all these questions. But now let's present the question, what the Yesh Me'ayin of the spheros, of the Kelim, let's say, of the world of Atzilus, and there's Yesh Me'ayin of Bria, and there's Yesh Me'ayin of Asiya. Hagashmis for sure. Yes, different levels of Yesh Me'ayin. Listen, what does it mean, Yesh Me'ayin? Ayin means nothing. From where? And sometimes people say Ayin means nothing, nothingness. But it doesn't mean really nothing. It means a lokus. But mi'ayin, it is such a chidush. The way something came to be is such an innovation in relation to what it was or wasn't before that we call it yesh me'ayin. Because of the gap, because the enormous tzimtzum. Now, there is a machloikes. What is this Ein Sof the Kabbalah talks about? Because only Ein Sof, as we just said, can create worlds, yesh me'ayin. And regarding this Ein Sof that can create yesh me'ayin, the machloikes is it atzmus or not? The Haramak Svirale, Reb Moshe Cordovero holds the Shem Ein Sof Kai le'atzmus habore. As we saw in regarding his view of Keser, the Ramak says that Ein Sof can only be applied to Atzmus Habore, to the essence of the Creator himself. And only about him you can say Ein Sof, that creates worlds. Veharame, which is Reb Menachem Azaria, your name is, I think, yeah? I will repeat it, okay. From Pano, or the 16th century, Italy. Sham, I think Sham in the Sefer Pelach Harimon, if I remember correctly, Perek Dalet, chapter 4, Svirale, he holds, the Bchinas Retzono Yisbarach hu hanikra Ein Sof. This is similar a little bit to the early Mekubalim, and he is an early Mekubal. The Bchinas Retzono is the Ratzon of Hashem that is called Ein Sof. Venikra, so it's not Atzmus, it's the Ratzon of Hashem. But the early Mekubalim held that Keser is Kadmon like Atzmus is Kadmon. It's also Ein Sof. So the Rameh says, well, Ein Sof is really the Ratzon, which is called Ein Sof, Venikra, also called Siba Rishona El Kol HaNimtzaim, the first reason for all beings, which is the divine will. מה שאין כן למהוסו ועצמוסו אין לייחס אפילו תואר סיבה. Which is not the case regarding Atzmus, which is not Ratzon. When you talk about Atzmus, says the Rameh, you cannot even attribute to him a term like Siba, like a reason, or a cause, or a reason for creation. Because he's way above Atzmus, he's way above any definition. So again, the Rameh, the Ramak, Reb Moshe Cordovero holds, Ein Sof, you can only call Atzmus. Atzmus is the only one you can apply the term Ein Sof. And only about Atzmus you can say that it creates worlds. That's it, that's the Ramak. All the rest is not Atzmus. And you cannot say Ein Sof. The Rameh says, Menachem Azaria from Pano, who was from the early Mekubalim, that about Atzmus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, you cannot use the adjective Ein Sof. You cannot call it, you cannot give adjectives to Atzmus. He's above Ein Sof as well. Ve'i efshar lomar, it's not possible that the Atzmus is the first reason, cause for worlds. You can't attribute anything of the kind to Atzmus. So according to the Rameh, to Reb Menachem from Pano, Azaria, only about Keser, which is the Ratzon of Hashem, you can say Ein Sof. And how you resolve it? Like the early Mekubalim, that Keser is Kadmon kekadmuso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That Keser, you cannot call it En Lo Tchila, but you can call it Ein Sof because it's just as Kadmon as HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there, Keser is there. That's how the early Mekubalim held. But it's not Atzmus. It's Keser. So regarding Ein Sof. We see that the Ramak says that Ein Sof you can only attribute to Atzmus. And according to the Rameh, you cannot call Atzmus Ein Sof. You can only call Ein Sof Keser. A Keser Ein Sof, but not Atzmus. Atzmus you cannot call Ein Sof. It's above that. There is an explanation here of Rabbi Gopin. You want to hear it? It might confuse you more though. It just explains why we have these two machlokesim, how each machlokes completes the other in terms of understanding the difference between the early Mekubalim and the later Mekubalim. But it can confuse you if you don't follow carefully. We can analyze this machlokes because it's an example for you to understand why the Rebbe is bringing this machlokes. What is he trying to resolve or to make clear, or what's behind all this? And he can go bigger and bigger to see the bigger picture, and there's many ways to see the depth of these discussions. We are interacting with the Maimar first time, there are so many layers. Let's just summarize so far what we said. That the machlekes of who is Ein Sof that creates worlds, that is brought in Kabbalah. Who is this Ein Sof that creates worlds? The early Mekubalim hold that only Keser, which means the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's the first source of worlds. And that's called Ein Sof. And the Ramak says, no, only Atzmus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu can and is able to create worlds, and only him you can call Ein Sof. And any other aspect is not Ein Sof. Now comes the Shita of the Arizal. What's Ein Sof? The Arizal will determine that Ein Sof is not Atzmus and not Keser. Rather, there is an in-between, an in-betweener, between Atzmus, God himself, godliness itself, and Keser, and the will of God. And this we have to study what it is. It really will be Or and Ma'or. But let's see. ומדברי האריזל מובן להדיח רע בזה. And from the words of the Arizal, we can see the verdict, the resolution between these two opinions. The Ramak says only the Atzmus you can call Ein Sof. The early Mekubalim says no, you cannot call Atzmus with the term Ein Sof because Atzmus is above these descriptions. And the Arizal is resolving this conflict. ומאחר שכתב שבקסר יש בחינה תחתונה של אין סוף, וכאילו נאמר בחינס מלכוס שבמלכוס דאין סוף. That since it says, the Arizal says, that in Keser, Pnimius HaKeser, right, we learned, there is the lowest aspect of Ein Sof, of the infinite itself, the Ma'atzil. And as if we say that it is Malchus of Ein Sof. Meaning that the Shita of the Arizal we brought in the previous Machlokes regarding Keser. The Keser, as we said, is divided to two. The inner aspect of Keser, according to the Arizal, is the lowest aspect of Ein Sof, of the Ma'atzil, of the emanator. Malchus of Ein Sof. Which is the last aspect before the Tzimtzum, of godliness before the Tzimtzum, and it's considered Ein Sof. That's, according to Arizal, Pnimius HaKeser. And then the outer aspect of Keser is the first of the Ne'etzalim, is the first of the emanations, the emanated, and that is the Sphira Mechudeshes, a Sphira that is a new creation. Okay, so according to this, מובן ומבואר בהדיא דאין סוף, אין רצונו לומר העצמוס של הבורא ממש. So according to the Arizal, to how the Arizal explains it, that Pnimius HaKeser is the lowest aspect of the Matzil, of the emanator. From this, you can deduce, how do you say, you can conclude from this that Ein Sof, he doesn't mean to say Atzmus of the Creator, Mamash, because in Atzmus of God, Mamash, Ein Shayach Klal Chas v'Shalom Lomar B'china Tachtona or Elyona Kanal. Because when you're talking about Atzmus Mamash, it's total and absolute oneness, and you cannot use the term higher level or lower level. So surely, Vadai, Ein Sof Lav Hainu Mahuso V'Atzmuso Mamash. According to how we analyze the words of the Arizal, of course we understand that the Arizal means that Ein Sof, it doesn't mean Mahuso V'Atzmuso Mamash, the Mahuso and Atzmus Mamash, אלא שיצדק בזה לומר בחינה תחתונה. Ein Sof is the way the Arizal looks at it is an aspect, a level of Elokus that will justify to call it בחינה תחתונה, the lowest aspect. Again, so from the words of the Arizal, that Ein Sof meaning the lowest aspect of the emanator, right? This it's clear that Arizal says that Pnimius HaKeser is the lowest aspect of the emanator. That's what the Arizal says. From this, we can understand that actually the Arizal does not accept the Shita of the Ramak that Ein Sof is the essence of God. Because if Ein Sof is the essence of God, there wouldn't be Mala and Mata, a higher level or a lower level, first level or lowest level. Because Atzmus cannot be divided and there's no higher and lower there. So you have to say that in the second Machloikas, the Arizal agrees with the principle of the Shita of the Mekubalim, that they hold that the Atzmus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, him himself, is not Ein Sof that is talked about in the books of Kabbalah, which is higher or lower. ומכל מקום, in any case, מובן מדבריו גם כן, we can understand from, meaning that Arizal is introducing to us an aspect which is in between Keser and Atzmus of Elokus itself. And therefore he holds like Mekubalim that Ein Sof does not apply to Atzmus, versus the Ramak that does say that Ein Sof is only applying to Atzmus. And at the same time, it is the higher and lower. And therefore it's not Mamash Atzmus if this has a higher and lower. ומכל מקום, and in any case, מובן מדבריו גם כן. We can also understand from the words of the Arizal, דלא סבירה לי כלל מה שכתב הרמה, דרצונו הוא הנקרא אין סוף. At the same time, we can also understand from the words of the Arizal that the Arizal does not agree with the Rameh, with Reb Menachem Azariah from Pano. What did Reb Menachem Azariah say? That רצונו הוא הנקרא אין סוף. Reb Menachem Azariah, מקובל ראשון, said that the Ein Sof applies to the Ratzon of Hashem, right? And therefore, the Arizal doesn't agree. כמובן, דבחינס מאציל, המבואר שם, that the aspect of the emanator that he explained there, אינו בחינס הרצון, is not the רצון, ועוד הרי בחינס רצון נקרא בו גם כן כסר. And רצון is also called כסר. So we understand from the words of the Arizal also that he doesn't agree with the Shita of the first Mekubalim that say, like the Rameh, that Keser, which means the Ratzon of Hashem, that is Ein Sof. Because according to the Arizal, Ratzon is the lowest aspect of Keser. Like we know that Ratzon is like Arich, and Tainug, the Pnimius, is like Atik, right? So the Arizal says that Ratzon is the lowest aspect of Keser. But the Matzil, the emanator, which is Ein Sof, is the highest aspect of Keser, the inner aspect of Keser. So you cannot say that Keser is Ein Sof. The Arizal doesn't agree with the first Mekubalim that Ein Sof applies to Keser. So now we see that the Arizal doesn't agree that Ein Sof is Atzmus, and also the Arizal doesn't agree that Ein Sof is Keser. So what is the Arizal introducing here? וכאמור, okay, fine. ואף שיש רייבה דכל רייבין, and even though we have the highest levels, like one is called Raiva Dekol Raivin, which means the Keser, the Ratzon of all Ratzonos. We're talking about Ak, Keser of Adam Kadmon, Nikra Ak, Adam Kadmon, or Keser the Adam Kadmon. That's the light that reveals Shabbos afternoon. So we can ask, yes, the Arizal doesn't agree that Keser itself is considered Ein Sof, but maybe, according to the Arizal, Ein Sof applies to levels that are higher than Keser, like Raiva the Kol Raivin, or Ak, or Keter the Ak. And maybe we can call them Ein Sof. Says the Rebbe, Mikol Makom. Nevertheless, מאחר שאמר שבבחינס קסר, אפילו דאק, שהוא הנקרא רצון, יש בו מבחינה תחתונה של אין סוף, מובן ומבואר דאין סוף למעלה מעלה מבחינת רצון. No matter what how high you go, even to Adam Kadmon and to Keser of Adam Kadmon. Nevertheless, says the Rebbe, since he says that in Keser, even Keser of Ak, of Adam Kadmon, which is the highest of worlds, so to speak, of the levels of worlds, attribute shaykh to worlds, which is called Ratzon. We learn that Adam Kadmon is Ratzon the Ratzon, right? Keser. So since the Arizal says that in Keser, even the highest Keser, there is the lowest aspect of Ein Sof, right? The Arizal taught us that Keser has two aspects, right? The inner aspect of Keser has the lowest aspect of Ein Sof. So that means the Ein Sof lemala mala mibchinas ratzon. That means if we say that the lowest aspect of Ein Sof is in the inner aspect of Keser, of Ratzon, that means that actually Ein Sof is way higher. Only its lowest level is present in inner of the aspect of Keser. So that means, Lemaise, that even the aspects higher than Keser, that are connected to Keser, and they are part of the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in them too, there is the lowest aspect of Ein Sof, they are themselves are not defined as Ein Sof. No matter highest level, no high level of Ratzon. How close the Ratzon is to Ein Sof, doesn't matter. It's still not equal to Ein Sof itself. ונמצא מובן מדברי האריזל, so we can understand from the words of the Arizal, דבחינה הנקרא אין סוף, הוא למעלה מבחינת רצון, ומכל מקום לאו היינו מהוסו ועצמוסו ממש. So what do we can conclude from the Arizal? We can conclude from analyzing the words of the Arizal that the aspect that there is called Ein Sof, that the Arizal calls Ein Sof, is למעלה מבחינת רצון, is higher than רצון, the כסר, ומכל מקום, nevertheless, לאו היינו מהוס ועצמוס ממש. At the same time, it's not the mahus va'atzmus, the essence of God. So again, what do we find? That on one hand, the Arizal agrees with the principle of the Ramak that you cannot apply the term Ein Sof on an aspect which is not Atzmus. And any aspect that has a tziyur to it, has a form and a hagdara, a definition, including keser, or raiva de kol raivin, or Adam Kadmon, are not Ein Sof. On the other hand, so that's on one hand. From that aspect, he agrees with the Ramak. On the other hand, the Arizal agrees also with the early Mekubalim, who holds that Atzmus of God is not Ein Sof. You can't call Atzmus of God Ein Sof. So what is here Rabbi Gopin says, what is the formula here that can summarize this? That on one hand, the Arizal agrees with the Ramak that you cannot call Ein Sof an aspect which is not Atzmus. Any aspect that is not Atzmus, even Raiva de Kol Raivin or Keser the Ark, you cannot call it Ein Sof. He agrees with that. At the same time, the Arizal says, well, Atzmus itself you cannot call Ein Sof. On one hand, he agrees that anything which is not Atzmus, you cannot call Ein Sof. You following me? The Arizal says on one hand, he agrees with the Ramak that anything which is not Atzmus, you cannot call Ein Sof. On the other hand, the Arizal agrees with the Mekubalim, who say that you cannot define Atzmus by calling it Ein Sof. What is the formula? So Rabbi Gopin writes, Ma she'einenu Atzmus eino Ein Sof, which means that is the way Arizal agrees with the Ramak, which whatever is not Atzmus is not Ein Sof. Okay? He agrees with that. Whatever is not Atzmus is not Ein Sof. And at the same time, v'gam Atzmus eino Ein Sof. And at the same time, Atzmus itself is also not Ein Sof, because it's higher. So the Arizal agrees with the Ramak that anything that is not Atzmus is lower than to be called Ein Sof. At the same time, Atzmus itself is higher than Ein Sof. You cannot call it Ein Sof. And this conclusion, says Rabbi Gopin, will lead us to the Chidush of the Alter Rebbe regarding Or Ein Sof. That Or Ein Sof is Or Me'en HaMa'or. So, on one hand, it's not something else than Atzmus. And at the same time, it's not Atzmus as well. And this is the Shita of the Arizal, as will be explained. So let's summarize. That the Hachra, the resolution of the Arizal regarding Ein Sof, understanding what really we mean when we say Ein Sof. So regarding this view of the Arizal, from the words of the Arizal, that in Keser, there is, in Pnimius HaKeser, there is the lowest aspect of Ein Sof. It's understood that Ein Sof is not Keser. You can't equate them. It's the lowest aspect of Ein Sof is in Keser, but it doesn't mean that Ein Sof equals Keser or Keser equals Ein Sof. On the other hand, and this is like the Ramak, anything else but Atzmus, you can't call it Ein Sof. Ein Sof is higher. On the other hand, the mere division of Ein Sof to a Bchina Elyoina and a Bchina Tachtoina, to a higher level or lower level of Ein Sof, teaches us that Ein Sof is not Atzmus, because Atzmus is oneness and there is no higher or lower level there, no levels. Can't divide it. So what is the decision of the Arizal? That whatever is not Atzmus is not Ein Sof, and Atzmus as well is not Ein Sof. And in the next Maimarim we will learn, so what is Ein Sof? We will learn what aspect we're talking about. And that will be Or and Maor. We'll see. Any questions? Please review or listen to the recording, review inside the text to make sure that we internalize all the information of this Maimar.